Hello, and welcome to the first episode of our four-part series of conversations where we look into the future of engineering education and career development, as we bring together leaders in education and industry experts to explore which new skills will be taught to young engineers, what training mid-career engineers need in order to return to work as the pandemic subsides, and how much can be done to confront the labor and skills gap in 2021 and beyond. My name is Carlos Gonzalez, Special Projects Manager at Mechanical Engineering Magazine and ASME.org. Today's conversation will focus on the evolution of engineering education post-COVID-19. The transition to remote learning was a shock for many universities and colleges across the country. Professors had to transform their in-person lectures into an engaging online class, and students had to take on more self-learning responsibilities and become their own teachers. Today's discussion will focus on the shift to online education at universities, how academia and industry can prepare young engineers to enter the new workforce, and the impact this change in teaching has on the future of engineering education. Joining me today are three guests who will discuss the adoption and the challenges the future of education will face. Please welcome Sanjay Sarma, Professor of Mechanical Engineering at MIT, Jeff Alderson, Product Manager for MATLAB Grader and Online Learning at Mathworks, and Daria Kotis-Schwartz, Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Colorado Boulder. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all our sponsors for today's event, and please make sure to check out the resource section on your console to get more information. Everyone, welcome to the discussion. I'm glad you can be here today. Why don't we get started by discussing the beginning of the pandemic, right? It's been a year, and so much has changed in the country for everything from not just education, right, but the industry in general. But why don't we kind of refresh people's minds as to what the beginning was? And Daria, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit how at the University of Colorado Boulder, how you guys handled those first few months.
I think one of the things that will help is to understand the framing of the lens I'm coming from, which is I teach a 230 to 250 person capstone design class. So industry sponsored, 30 different projects, all from industry. So at the time the pandemic was hitting, and anyone who runs a year-long capstone design class in mechanical engineering can feel this and understand this. We were right in March where we were at the end of fabrication and just starting testing. So one of the things that we've been reflecting on recently, because we're actually going through performance evaluations for staff right now, was this sudden shift that happened. So we literally went from things being status quo, business as normal, business as usual. And within days, we completely had to overhaul our operations into something completely different. The way we've been describing it lately is this sense of chaos and crisis that happened. We walked in on a Tuesday to class, told our students, ignore all the rumors you're hearing on Reddit right now. We're not closing down. We said, however, in case we do close down, we have to have a plan in place. So that ended up being on Tuesday, mid-March, only by Thursday for us to be evacuating every single one of our student projects out the door. So the chaos was taking every staff member, every faculty member we had on hand. We were taking large pieces of hardware and putting it in trucks and cars. We were taking thousands of dollars of equipment and sending it home with students as fast as possible to make sure that we were still delivering on these projects for industry. But it was more than that. We were trying to make sure that our students had the opportunity to finish out that senior year. And we talk about how when we reflect back on it now, we were getting information coming down from the university at the exact same time our students were. So we would get together as a capstone faculty, spend 4 hours just planning, only to get an email come in and we say, okay, that's not going to work. And all of a sudden we had the state shutting down. And it was happening so fast. We had to figure out how to take this immense, large hands-on curriculum, move it into apartments and studios, and we had to have many times we had to have folks giving permission to the students, roommates permission to actually have this happening while watching what was happening in a public health sphere also. So we were trying to protect them from a health perspective, but at the exact same time, we were still trying to move their education forward. And that lasted all through that last half of March into April. I'm sure there's others that can understand celebrations that were happening at the end. We were the ones who are having to tell our students that they wouldn't be an in-person graduation, that they wouldn't be returning to campus. And you saw, and so many of us can remember this as mechanical engineers when we were graduating from our undergraduates. Imagine that last month where all of a sudden you realize you're not going to have your graduation and the job you lined up may not be happening. And we said every time we got online with our students, our role was to be their rock, right? We were the solid foundation for them, assuring them it was going to be okay. And meanwhile, we had our kids and families at home at the exact same time, and trying to take care of our own homeschooling and what was happening in our own lives. And every time we said we turned on those cameras, we made sure our students had nothing but hope that this was going to be okay, that we were going to recover, that we were going to celebrate them, and that we would manage this because first and foremost, we always said this, we're engineers, we're problem solvers, we're going to find a way to make this work. And that's what we would tell them every single time, Carlos. So that is just a glimpse into a much longer period of time. But I know that you would like to get some other input on this.
We're going to dive into how things have happened and evolved since then. But Sanjay, how was it at MIT? Was it similar rollout of how to transition from in-person to online?
Yeah, I think Daria put it really well. It was moving, it was chaotic. We were all trying to survive and keep our own lives together at the same time. We also have a lot of international students, which made it particularly complicated. And then, of course, now I'll take a approach it from a different direction, because I don't think I can add to anything Daria said about the undergraduate experience. On the graduate experience, same thing. We had to send students home. I dropped off an oscilloscope in one student's house, and another student's laptop broke. I had 3 PhDs graduate, and we did three PhD defenses, and I sent home, we sent home goodies, a bottle of champagne to do the actual celebration. But MIT, one of the approaches we took was we started working on testing a lot of the, for example, Moderna is an MIT, very close to my MIT related company. And so we start getting involved also on the research side for COVID, everything from testing to contact tracing, etc. And frankly, that was a privilege, because you didn't feel helpless. And to our grad students, that helped a lot. I think a lot of schools did that. I'm sure the University of Colorado did. Just being able to play a role in the turmoil that this created, as opposed to simply bobbing along, which I think the rest of humanity had to contend with. So well said, Daria, and I really can't add more than that.
No, I mean, it's a valid point to make. A lot of schools have done a lot of research into how to help during this transition. I know that at MIT, the robotics lab has looked into how robots can be used to help the medical professional industry, correct? And a lot of universities have shifted their gear towards what they can do to aid in the pandemic, whether it's research or, lab work or different projects. I'm going to turn to Jeff now, because you're in a unique position, right? Working at Mathworks, and we all know Mathworks for being the producers of popular programs as MATLAB and Simulink, used across much of the industry, but it's also used in over 6,500 universities. It's a popular tool among students. So what did you guys encounter at the beginning of the pandemic, and how did you support students' effort going forward?
It's humbling to hear like these stories from educators, and imagine from a vendor perspective, our phone ringing off the hook and our emails lighting up when all of our customers were being told they had to bring their courses online and provide equitable access to our software and our products, even from home and remotely. And so we wanted to make sure that our customers had that access, no matter where they were. They could run our products either in the cloud or on their own devices. And so we were lucky enough, we actually have an enterprise model for licensing that we use. It's called the campus-wide license. We also have a version for community and technical colleges as well, that gives you full access to all of our products on one sort of subscription for the university. And those universities that had access to that would allow students and researchers and grad students and undergrad students to be able to install on any device, as also run it on MATLAB Online in our cloud as well. So opening up access to the software, not having to be in a computer lab, was really critical and important for that. But also there was the curriculum aspects of this about using our tools in an online, sort of teaching model. So we also have a customer success function in our education team, which is sort of a worldwide network of professionals that support instructors that bring their courses online. And they were sort of mobilized to help our university partners roll out courses based on our online teaching solutions. We had hundreds of virtual events, online training programs for instructors, educators, to try to bring their entire programs, online, and leveraging like work that we've done with MOOCs and other programs where we've helped educators build these contents for an online audience. We also wanted to create a destination for where educators could go to ask questions about using our products in a distance learning or an online teaching mode. So we actually stood up in April of last year, we stood up a distance learning community hosted on our website where educators can go and share examples about how they're using our tools, where folks like myself and other product managers can show best practices and how-to instructional content and videos about how to actually bring your labs or your instruction online. And we also like guest host blogs and videos that are authored both by Mathworks staff and our customers. So we tried to convene, sort of a community of sharing on our products as well. And it was pretty successful.
And, I think that's vital. I think that was vital to assist with the online transition. And that leads us to our next point of the idea of the online classroom, the idea of the flipped classroom. Sanjay, you recently released a book called Grasp that covers this idea of open learning and the flipped classroom. For those that are not familiar, could you please explain the idea of the flipped classroom and how that can be applied to engineering?
I think what COVID has done is it's confiscated the privilege of being together, sort of nature saying, you're done, you're not taking advantage of it. You're just wasting all that time, right? I like to say that our education, I'm being a little bit extreme here, but I hope you will forgive me. Our education was socially distanced to begin with, and Zoom just exposed it to the world, right? I mean, if you're sitting in the back of a 50% class and, looking at your iPhone, and the professor is frankly just sort of going on, right? Why is that any different from the Zoom classroom? And on the flip side, I'm the vice president for open learning at MIT. I lead an effort to put all our courses online. Zoom lectures are not online education. Zoom is the worst of both worlds. It's neither good online education, which is asynchronous, pre-recorded videos that students watch, they can pause, they can fast forward, like edX. I sit on the board of edX or Coursera or Khan Academy. That's proper online education. At least if you did the classroom, you had some social connection. Zoom is like the worst of both worlds. But I can't blame the professors because we were, as Daria said, scrambling, right? Now, MIT was in better shape because we put a lot of courses online, but nonetheless, most of our classes weren't. And professors were, taking care of their kids and, you're giving a lecture and the cat walks onto your screen, in front of your camera. You just deal with it, just roll on because we're making deal, right? Now, but the point is good online education, which is asynchronous videos, are a incredible tool for flipping the classroom. So what is flipping the classroom? When nature grants us back the privilege of being together. If we recreate the Zoom classroom, except we did it in person, what a shame. Because when we're back together, I hope we focus on the things you can only do in person and not online. And that is, the making that Daria is referring to, right? That is the coaching, it's the context, it is the reflection, it is the teamwork. And there's a lot of cognitive science that says that those are the things that you can only do in the classroom. The cognitive science, which thank you for mentioning my book, also tells us things that you actually cannot do well in the classroom, like short videos, right? You can do a 10-minute lecture, which is the optimal length of a lecture, because it takes 10 minutes to get people to sit down, but you can do a 10-minute online course, right? Online video. So the ideal combination is to actually do the lectures beautifully in one shot, asynchronous, deliver them to the student. They can consume them at their pace. If they get distracted, they can pause. If they get bored, they can fast forward, right? And in the classroom to focus on the things we couldn't possibly do online. And if we don't do this, and the universities and schools that don't do this will struggle to establish their value proposition to society, in my view.
Daria, I'm going to ask you, it's been a year, and kind of going off what Sanjay just said, You've reopened a little bit somewhat to a limited capacity. What have you been doing differently to augment the online portion, which I'm assuming is still happening, but now you have this in-person aspect back? How are you handling both?
One of the things I'm so fortunate for is that through this chaos that happened, um, many people were willing to come together the day after our spring 2020 students graduated. We gave ourselves one day. We all took a single day break and started planning in working groups the next day. And in many ways, we started the conversations and were forced to start the conversations that Sanjay was discussing, which is what has to happen in person. How do we prepare for the fact that we're going to be in this online environment? And we only had 3 months to make it happen. And for folks who have put together flipped classrooms in a really well done manner, it is a lot of investment and time and education to learn how to do that. There's a skill training and learning curve at the same time. So we actually took the mantra over the year, and our mantra was plan for remote, augment in person. So we went and we really looked at our curriculum across the board and made decisions around what would we absolutely positively want to do with them in person if we could, knowing that at any time we could be shut down and sent home again. It made us think creatively, but it made us also really think about our mechanical engineering curriculum and look at what could be done asynchronously, what could be done in person. Now, the one thing I can say is we were adamant about protecting a portion of the hands-on learning that we wanted the mechanical engineers to have to be able to, really it's about the preparation for the practice. Where did we see that preparation for them after graduation, and what could be done at home instead? And as Sanjay said, there's certain things you can't send students home with welding equipment or a mill very easily. It can be done, but just not very easily. And one of the things that we really started focusing on is how could we quickly rethink how we were using that lab time, that lecture time. Oh, Sanjay, I'm right with you. 10 minutes is the maximum amount of time. I always joke, if I really want my students to hear me, I have 3 minutes. And that's all I have at the very beginning. But some of the things that we did, Carlos, over the last year that we will, there's portions of our curriculum we protected and consciously protected. So what we did is we couldn't have students in machine shops. So we created an online intake system that looked very much like what they would see in industry. We did the same thing for other spaces that were maker type spaces where students were, whether it was electronics, whether it was additive manufacturing areas. Those intake systems actually created some really amazing efficiencies that we'll be able to use in the future, but also really helps our students learn how to technically communicate with someone else who is making parts for you at the same time. So we will absolutely keep that. One of the other ones we did is we really started rethinking the lab experience. There's so much new technology out there, right? Small oscilloscopes and function generators that could go home with students. Do we have to do that in a lab space in the traditional way we did it? Or, Sanjay, like you were saying, could we bring that in and use that in the lecture halls in the future instead, and have asynchronous lectures that prepare them to do that work? But then we are there to help coach them, to help work with them on that one-on-one way that actually sometimes is hard to do in this Zoom format at the exact same time. So one thing we have said is this year has pushed all of us, and I don't just mean faculty, staff too, to think in completely different ways about the way we're educating, but also to get down to the core of what we're really trying to do to prepare them for graduate school, to prepare them for industry as they leave us. And how did we go ahead and maintain those in unique ways? So Carlos, just to summarize for you, some of the big ones I see us using spaces differently. I see us continuing because we made the investment also in the technology to be able to create asynchronous lectures now for our students. I see us continuing to do that because our students are asking for that afterwards. I see us still preserving the hands-on side that we hope will prepare them for industry. So we were doing that before, and we will do it afterwards, and hopefully on bigger scales again than we're doing right now at the exact same time. But I think that by far, we will rethink the way that we walk into a lecture hall every single time. And I will also say this, I think there is not one faculty member or staff member who is student facing who will ever take that for granted again,
For
based
sure.
on what we're doing this year. I don't know any of us that will ever take for granted the idea of being able to be face to face with our students again and do that coaching, Sanjay, right? To be able to like help them through our graduate students, our undergraduates. There is a piece of that coaching that is so hard for me to do online, that I can do when I'm with them, because I can see their not just their facial expressions, but I can also see their body language to really know how they're doing. So
No, I mean, that's a great point. I don't think any of us are going to take that for granted again. But again, this idea of the building of the structure that is both digital and in person, and Jeff, now I'll turn to you in how software and how engineering software in general, right, has kind of filled the gap of in-person, not just education, but work as well. So what is your take on how the engineer and the role of engineering software has kind of exploded in this past year?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear those stories about like driving home with like the big pile of hardware in your car and getting it running somewhere else. You know, engineering software is going to help educators to fill that gap, because there's certain fundamental aspects of engineering education that can be done effectively online in software, right? So modeling and simulation is a really key aspect of that, and so that's where Mathworks and where our focus is, you know, in engineering education. And so that would, you know, that type of tool lets, you know, the instructor bring interactive virtual labs into their online courses, still allows students to participate, seeing the results of their code or their models or their simulations, you know, take life. And it really still fosters sort of that active learning experience, which is critical for engineering education. But I'd be remiss to say it's not just about having really good software that looks good and has these really cool models. We've seen really great examples of engineering software working well. And so we wanted to make sure we weren't just providing access to core software. We've also got to make sure that the software comes with content, right? Instructors and educators need example lectures and labs and assessments, so they can actually see what that software looks like in practice in a good way, or with good reference examples from their peers. And so, you know, in Mathworks, we actually created a new set of web pages focused on online teaching and learning with MATLAB and Simulink, so that educators would have a new destination to go to see these sorts of examples. And on that site, we actually showcase examples like the Robotarium at Georgia Tech, right? We also cover, you know, all manner of resources and examples from customers on that page. You know, actual files you can download and run to see what other folks are doing for instructional resources and lectures, virtual labs, you know, full online assessments, because we wanted to make sure that you know, it's not just enough to see really cool software working, but can I actually download the actual code? Can I actually run that? Can I actually get it up and running myself in a short period of time? And who would I reach out to if I have a question about it? So it's this combination of having really great software, really great content and examples, and really great support was sort of like the magic that really worked for us with our customers in the pandemic response.
And just going back to you for 1 second, Jeff, this idea of the virtual lab versus a hands-on lab, what hurdles did you have in trying to replicate a virtual lab, right? Because that must have been challenging.
What we've been seeing and dealing with is, like, you know, how do we equip our educator customers with everything they would need to replicate the same sort of laboratory experience, with no physical, you know, space limitations. You know, that equipment is costly. It has a physical presence. It's hard to get to. And so we were trying to sort of define for our customers, you know, types of lab experiences that could still achieve the same progression of skills development, right? You know, make sure you still have room for soft skills development, active learning, and building industry readiness with the same tools and the same, you know, projects that you'll be experiencing, you know, in industry. And so you've got to be able to show whether that's simulated interfaces, the same interfaces that you would have seen in the lab, you know, either with virtual, you know, knobs and buttons and controls, or provide a remote access to a lab for experimentation, right? So can you provide sensors that you can access remotely through software with Internet of Things, right? Can I still keep the lab running on premise at the campus, but put some instrumentation in and listen to the data and work on that in a remote way. And so we saw a lot of customers doing some really cool things with IoT and reaching back into the physical spaces, but using software at home in the hands of the students to do the instrumentation. And we have a benefit of having hundreds of thousands of partners and users worldwide. You said 6,500 universities, and so we wanted to make sure that we were really showcasing those examples of how you can incorporate group work, hardware in the loop, simulations and models to show examples of computational thinking, but still have a really good high degree of interactivity, right? So it's not just watching something run, it's also interacting with it and seeing cause and effect of changing the code or changing the models. So because we wanted them to, again, it comes back to that, showing the real life, real world, projects, at home or in a simulated way, they're still applicable to what they would see in industry.
So,
just two other points just to point out there. So one thing that was really key for virtual labs is just the timing worked out really well. We actually launched a new product last year called Simulink Online. So it was sort of like an online in the cloud version of Simulink, which is our flagship model-based design software. And that has been critical for making our software for modeling and simulation available to universities in the cloud, so that folks could just move their labs that are based in Simulink right online without really losing too much time or fidelity in the models. It was really great to see that. It was just great timing, but also really met that market need.
No, that's excellent. I love, the hand in hand, the back and forth, and kind of working together and making sure that everything is done correctly. Because like we've been discussing, the most important thing here is the student experience and making sure that they're not missing out on anything, which I know has been a challenge for universities this past year. I do want to take a step away from the students and transition to the institutions at large. So this is a question for Sanjay and Daria. What have you realized at either the administration level or the curriculum level that you thought needed change? This has probably opened a bunch of new doors for you, and you might be for the first time looking at something and being like, wow, we really need to tweak this. It's not working currently. And also, maybe this changes the kind of educator you're hiring. Maybe you're looking for a different kind of teacher now. So Daria, I'll start with you.
I think one of the things is realizing that any of us who are in the administrative realm started to deal with the unexpected reductions in enrollment and subsequent reductions in budgets. And it happened very quickly. And it's really interesting because Sanjay brought up before this idea of a value proposition, where all of a sudden something I never heard us speaking about before was, what was our value proposition as a mechanical engineering department, specifically at CU Boulder, and how for us to think around administration that way. And it was actually, Carlos, it led into curriculum, right? Why did students come to CU Boulder? Why would they choose to go there rather than other universities? And how did we maintain that? Because one of the fears we actually had is that in this chaos, we could accidentally do damage that would have implications for a decade. It would be easy to quickly make cuts without realizing that we would not be able to rebuild. And these were in areas of equity and inclusion, and the things that we had made advances in our engineering education curriculums. And if we weren't careful, we understood that it would take us many years to recover as this was actually happening. And I would say we were looking at this both on the administrative side, but also on the curricular side. So I'd mentioned it before, is that hard look at your curriculum and what really needs to be there, as well as what did you preserve? What did you make sure you preserved in each of those cases? And that was on curricular sides and administrative sides. Now, the other thing I have to say is we've learned there's no such thing as day-to-day operations anymore, right? Things that used to be what you would just do as everyday operations has now 3 steps to get approvals and make sure we're socially distanced, and we have these pieces along the way. So it has actually made us take a really hard look at our operations also, to make decisions around where could we potentially have efficiencies. but also we learned where our greatest pain points were quite quickly. If we had problems in communication, they quickly became salient during all of this. Because when this is your only mode of communicating with one another, you're not dropping by each other's offices to quickly be able to fill the gaps. So it actually helped us identify where we had inefficiencies in our models, and that is a reality. Universities more and more moving forward will have to become different models, both of, and I'm very careful with the word efficiency, by the way, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but business as usual will be very difficult for us to go back to, just in terms of what our budgets look like. At the exact same time. Some of the things that I mentioned before was when we for years had ideas of things we wanted to do. The benefit of the pandemic is it forced us to do them quickly. There was a sense of urgency to put improvements in that we had as a back burner activity that actually quickly became front burner activities. So whether that was checkout systems for equipment, whether that ended up being the way we were managing space, all of that quickly changed. And those will be things that stay with us after all of this. That part won't end up going away. I believe those, oh, you also asked us, that's right. What different types of teachers, kind of educational tools. I have to tell you how humbled I am to see how both our faculty and staff were able to pivot. So one of the things that I do credit also, how many researchers and professors and universities have to pivot their research given the times over time. And I don't know that I would say that we are going to be looking for someone who is different, because over the years, we did look not just at research records of the professors we were bringing in, but their ability to engage in active learning, their ability to run their research labs in an entrepreneurial way. We looked for individuals who were collaborative and who were cooperative. And these were all pieces that were essential this year for us to be able to make the changes that we needed to do. So I don't know that we'll change who we're looking for, because many of these skill sets that we needed during the pandemic were also the baseline of the faculty we were already looking for when we were doing hiring before this.
Great answer. And Sanjay, same question?
I'll say three things, Carlos. I think that Daria hit some very important points. The first thing is that I see the past year, 2020, as slingshotting society into the future. I like to joke that the 21st century really begins in 2021. It didn't begin in 2000 or 2001, because Facebook was, Google was already there, Amazon was already there, right? Nothing really changed, but we've just seen society go through a massive digital transformation. We're hanging by a thread, and we hung by a thread last year for the first time. We relied entirely on that thread, which is technology, right? If it were not for the internet, society would not have been nearly as productive as it turned out to be. We've sort of survived. And Zoom became not the thing you did when you missed a flight. It became the thing you did every day, right? The valuation of Zoom exceeds the top 10 airlines combined. It's crazy. So first of all, I think our curricula have to fundamentally look at the future. So that's the first thing. The second thing that happened is, let's not ignore, and I don't think anyone intends to, but something else happened in 2020, which is the recognition of historic social injustice in this country with George Floyd. And what's happening during COVID is that a number of people are going to go out of work. So there's all sorts of social unrest. And so I think that a social ethical responsibility is something curricularly we need to take on much more seriously going forward, and then the final thing is, during COVID, when you're teaching, there's this great and somewhat disturbing quote from Hemingway. He said, "You should write as if you're having it tattooed on your back." It's a horrible thought, but the point is that you got to pick your words very carefully, right? Be very careful in what they're going to write. In some ways, COVID was like that, because teaching was difficult. So it really focused people on what really needed to be taught and how to do it well, as opposed to the grab bag approach, where every professor's pet topic and controls entered every controls course. And then you can take it out because it might show up in some PhD qualifier or something. And I think what COVID has forced us to do is reconsider and really focus on what really matters. So those are my 3 points.
No, well said, and I agree with all the 3 points. We're transitioning to the end here, so I want to start gathering your final thoughts. And the first big question I have is, what new opportunities are now available to students that probably weren't explored before? A lot of students are now, right, entering the new workforce, and they might be working from home when they initially thought that they were going to be working in an office or in a cubicle setting. And it's different, it's challenging. I personally feel like the students have risen to the challenge to kind of make sure that they meet their end of the deal of getting a great education. But at the same time, what's now open to them, and what tools should be emphasized as they enter the workforce? And this is a question for all 3 of you. So Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Come back to this just in terms of like it was both something that students were still struggling with, but what we saw where the opportunity was, which was, I mentioned earlier, that equitable access to tools, right? Let's be clear, we've come a long way, everything's going online now, but there's still students that don't have access to certain types of technology, software, bandwidth, things like that. And so schools that actually had already put in place, equitable access or the ability to install software on their laptops or had devices that they could bring with them had a head start. And so that opportunity to actually let the students have access to the same tools they're going to be using in industry, on their personal devices, access in the cloud, really gave those universities a head start. Also, just the learning experience itself, I think the students are more prepared to actually live and work the way that I am. Like I'm working from home, like we all are now, and so just those basic skills like communication, collaboration, code sharing, the work products of modeling and simulation, and peer reviews of things. Those sorts of experiences you have in online courses with virtual labs are the same sort of experiences we see in industry. So it's good to have that sort of hands-on experience with those same practices of their profession. Also, students, I think we challenged them to be very clear. We were challenged to give them clear expectations about deliverables throughout their courses, like probably in a way we weren't before, in terms of what they're being assessed on, what the expectations were for timing, and making time for collaboration type activities, things that would have happened outside the classroom or in person. Make sure you're making space for those things, and making sure that there was good handoff between peers, and reaching out for assistance from teaching staff and graders and support professionals when they needed it. That was, I think, something that students really needed to sort of self-advocate in this online learning mode. And then I think the last thing I would point out is like patience and persistence, right? Patience is a virtue, but it's also a great skill to have when you're a learner in an online course. You have to have patience with the technology. You have to have a little bit of grace with respect to your instructors that are also learning new things while you're learning new things. And so that carries through into industry as well. It's like, working within teams and having a little bit more empathy for others that are going through the same things you're doing. Was sort of a really nice sort of outcome from everybody being online together.
And Daria, the same question?
I think one of the things is that, reflecting back, there's been missed opportunities for our students along the way, things that I saw for others, but there's also been new challenges. So when I go ahead and take a look at the groups that we're teaching right now, there's a different sense of resiliency in them that I can already see growing than some of my students I've had in, say, the past 10 years. So one is that resiliency that is going to be a different skill set this group has, but the other one is a self-directed learning that I am watching come out of this environment. It is a much more conscious effort to make an appointment to come see your professor on Zoom. It's a much more conscious effort even to go ahead and send a message on Slack. The barrier is different than the questions that we could be asked in person. And it has ended up putting them on a pathway of being able to find the resources that are very similar to what they will be challenged with when they head out that first year. So I definitely see that as some of the changes that are coming. Now, the one thing though, you also asked Carlos is, when you think about our industry partners, our companies that will be onboarding these students in the next few years. One of the things that we know from research we did in the Capstone to Work project is that our students really do in that first year of work struggle with the workplace communication. And it's such a transition of going from working and communicating in a peer group, and then actually working and communicating with multiple generations of individuals, all with different level, knowledge of the company, skills, background, and being able to have those workplace communications. That's an area that we see that our companies, that we're hoping that there'll be an awareness for as our students are going out, because it was there in the past, and it's one of the areas we're finding to be the most difficult to coach in this environment, is that being able to have those informal workplace communications. Many times we talk about communication as being the technical reports or the technical presentations, but it's our students who have to be able to sit still in these small environments, whether it's Zoom or around a boardroom table, who have to have email communications, who end up having to have conversations still on the phone. And that's a preparation and onboarding that we're hoping our companies will be prepared for the group that's coming out from the pandemic. But also to be thinking about what we've really found through research is that it's a context gap more so than a content gap. That there is such a difference in context that we can't replicate no matter what we try to do. No matter how hard I try in their senior year, I cannot replicate what it is going to be like working in different types of industries and different types of philosophies and environments for those students. And we feel that this year they're incredibly resilient and strong technically, but the skills that we many times call soft skills, I call them professional skills.
Right.
Those professional skills that our students need will continue to need coaching and development as they go out, because we don't know for sure how they're doing in that realm this year. So with a little luck, we'll have some industry partners who hear this, and we'll consider that as we think about how we onboard and mentor our mechanical engineers coming into companies the next few years, and especially if they're coming in an online format.
Part of our conversation series is going to talk about mid-career, and I think a lot of those professional skills are challenging as well. What professional skills may no longer apply. But Sanjay, your thoughts on, what skill set students outgoing will need, and whether or not they have new opportunities ahead of them.
Well, I mean, I think we are entering a new era. The future of work is different. Companies aren't going to grow in the near future. We were already in the gig economy, and it's going to be more. What's the adjective of giggy? It's going to be more giggy going forward.
Technical term.
And is that okay? Can I say giggy? Am I approved to say that?
Yeah, the technical term, I think.
But thanks. So in this giggy environment, I think that our students are going to have to become the CEOs of their own lives. We went through a period where you always aspire to work for someone else, especially a large corporation, and you sort of grew in that corporation. Over the last 10 or 15 years, entrepreneurship has taken off, which is great. But it's inevitable in the new economy with the number of people, more than 10 million people looking for work. And especially our students will come out to a world where they'll end up becoming freelancers and e-lancers. They're going to have to be the chief marketing officers of their own lives. It sort of picks up on what both Daria and Jeff said. So that's, I think, a pretty fundamental thing. In some ways, World War II shaped a whole generation, right? We call them the great, the great generation of that. Unfortunately, many of them are passing away as we speak. My grandfather was in World War II, and he's a very different human being than this is out of India. Than out of my generation. So I think the silver lining to this horrible dark cloud that we've been through is that these students who've been magnificent, and I think both Jeff and Daria spoke about it, are going to be forged in fire and going to come out as a mini greatest generation, and we need to give them the tools and the opportunities to be that. And, just come back to your earlier question as well, what universities ought to do is, we have clung to FaceTime because it made us relevant. We have to start embracing distance. So what if a student wants to do a summer internship at Mathworks and then continue into the fall? Let them take the 2 courses online and give them credit. For God's sake, they're learning to be adults, which they'll need to be in this world. And they already are adults. So we need to embrace distance. The other thing is, again, comes back to what both Jeff and Daria said, we have to embrace portability. More and more labs can travel with them. This is the era of 3D printing and FPGAs and Raspberry Pis and Beagle boards and Mathworks and Simulink and so on, right? And let's try and make the labs portable so that they can have more agency. I think the future is agency, and we need to give it back to our students.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to you three for last remarks. Any last thoughts that you want to impart on our audience? We have a healthy student membership section as well, and that are probably watching this. So what are your last words to them as they are transitioning and moving forward in their careers? Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So just to step way back and observe everything that happened for online learning in the past year, I think we've proven, whether from the software vendor side, the university side, or the student side, that you don't need to be in the physical classroom or laboratory to have a great engineering education, right? So we have now set an expectation for all stakeholders that the coursework, the projects, the assessments can be done anywhere at any time. And so that expectation now needs to be met every year going forward, right? I think it's gonna be really hard for the pendulum to swing all the way back and saying, oh, we have to be in face-to-face for these activities. So I guess one thing I would say for students is challenge your professors and professors challenge your students. What are the things that are absolutely critical that you must be together for, and what are the things that can be done elsewhere, more than just a flipped classroom, but actually reevaluate which things actually do require that face-to-face interaction that you can't get any other way. I would also challenge, speaking from the industry side, something that I think students need to do for themselves as they transition into the workplace is you have to embrace a mindset of lifelong learning to stay abreast of these new technologies using your profession. And going online with your courses has exposed students to a lot of technologies that they're going to have to use in their careers going forward. And I talked about a few of them today that are provided by Mathworks, but every company that you go to in industry, has these special types of tools that are used in the profession. Online learning has given you an eye into that. So as a lifelong learner, take advantage of those things, right? And also as a learner, I think the other thing I would say for engineering education or engineers in general is take advantage of some of these new technologies to showcase your work. There's a lot of online video creation going on right now. Everyone has got their own personal YouTube channels, but also take advantage of like electronic portfolios, share files on GitHub and make that part of your portfolios, really showcase your work. I think it's one thing that's really changing engineering education is that the artifacts of learning don't stay on your computer that never get opened up again once you graduate and go on industry. You should be able to hit the ground running with files and functions and models that you've used in your academic career, day one in industry. So it's really important to take that stuff with you.
Thank you. Sanjay, your final thoughts, last remarks?
Well, I think I'll pick up on what Jeff just said. I think that our social contract in education is sort of odd. Imagine if I said to young people that you need to exercise for the first 4 years of your life and you'll be fit for the rest of your life. You never have to go to a gym again, right? That's sort of what we say today. Really, the future is you're going to have to go to the gym a few times a week. And the gym that Jeff is referring to is the learning gym, which is, and if I may sort of twist that metaphor some more, I sort of think of us as sort of standing on a treadmill that's moving backwards. If you're not jogging forward, you're going to fall off the edge. And that's the state of knowledge today. Mm-hmm. So you will be successful if you're learning all the time. So,
thank you. And Daria, your last thoughts.
I think my last thoughts are to go back to what I had said earlier is fundamentally, we were all trained as problem solvers. So with the years that are coming, we can each figure this out. And whether it is in our workplaces or our homes, I am so thrilled that I had that education to allow me to have the most basic approach to any problem, to be able to look at it as something to be solved, that I could solve. That being said, one of the things that we also recently reflected on and noticed was that our students arrived with a state of loss this year. So very much that initial part of the academic, it was very much what I have lost and how my expectations are not being met. And to watch that change into a trajectory of, I can do this, I can solve this, we said has been amazing to witness, but also with that I think that you also have to allow time for self-reflection. So no matter what audience is looking at this right now, right? Whether it is our students, our young career, mid-career, later in your career, I don't know that all of us have taken that time for self-reflection over this last year to really understand and learn from what this pandemic has brought us. And with that, I also want to pick up on what Sanjay said about agency, because one thing that I hope for all of our professionals out there, as well as for our students, is they take a chance to reflect on the agency they've been afforded this year and hopefully look at ways that they can preserve that moving forward. Because I think that that is incredibly important as we do try to take on some of these massive social issues that are facing us, whether it's career issues, family issues. And so I just wanted to point out that piece of agency again to all of our listeners. So.
Well, thank you so much to our three panelists for joining us in our discussion today. For the people watching this tomorrow, our next conversation will take place and it will focus on the class of COVID-19 and how new graduates can make a first grade impression. Again, I want to thank our panelists and a special thank you for our sponsors for today's event. I hope everyone has a great afternoon.